Very well. In the wise words of Matthew McConaughey, all right, all right, all right. I'm here today with Stephan Kesting, right?
Yes, sir.
I should have checked before we started recording. I actually have like from time to time I get names wrong, and it's kind of funny where I don't learn to ask before we start. Um, and man, you are a lot of things. So I'm gonna kind of like go with some catchy words, and then we can elaborate on all that, of course. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that we're gonna talk about. But to present you as my guest, I guess, firefighter, wilderness adventurer, uh, BJJ black belt, and apparently other martial arts were hard to find which other ones. So we'll do well in that on that too, because it's an area of interest of mine. And fellow Canuck and owner of an amazing mustache. So
Yeah, I think all those
writer,
are fair
author.
accusations. Yeah, and now writer, author, please, author. I
Mm-hmm.
should have worn my beret and my monocle and
Auteur.
had
Yeah,
a glass of wine here
that's
to
true.
take it into character properly.
Yeah, but for my time zone, I'm going with coffee though. So, um, so okay, let's start with the book. I guess it's kind
Sure.
of one of those things that I looked into it, and you went to have you went to do some shenanigans in the subarctic. Apparently,
Yeah.
you wrote a book
Uh,
and everything.
well, the book was definitely a byproduct. I went into this trip not at all thinking that it would turn into a book. The trip came out of something I'd been thinking about for about 20 years. And then, life came along and kids came along. And then it turns out that a deadly illness came along, polycystic kidney disease. And, I am very heavily self identify as a firefighter, as a martial artist, as an outdoors person. And as my ability to do those things began to shut down, it it creates a lot of self doubt and it creates a lot of questioning of who are you if you can't do these physical things that you've always identified with.
Hmm.
And so one of my thoughts going into the surgery was, well, I hope I survive. But almost more importantly is I hope I get back to full capacity because surviving, but really only existing between the couch and the bathroom would be a pretty shitty existence after having lived very much in my body.
Yeah.
So setting as one of the goals of getting back, coming back from this thing, goal number one was to get back on the mats. And that took about 6 or 7 months, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
And goal number two was to finally get up north and do this rather extreme trip that I'd been thinking about for 20 years. And so I did eventually end up pulling that off as well.
Just and of course, like like, describing in as much detail or lack thereof as you're comfortable with. But that disease I'm not familiar with. So
Sure.
what? Yeah, what was it? Or maybe not
It's a
exactly,
genetic
but yeah.
well, it's a genetic condition.
Okay.
And basically your kidneys, you've got two kidneys, they're
Mhm.
about each about the size of your fist.
Okay.
And when you have polycystic kidney disease, you can think of your kidney as a whole bunch of little fuel filters all
Yep.
lined up beside each other.
Okay.
And in this disease, every 10th fuel filter decides it doesn't want to be a fuel filter anymore. It wants to be a weather balloon. And so it expands, and your kidneys go from fist size to, small football sized, but they don't become better. They become worse as they get bigger.
That sounds awful.
So yeah, your kidney function starts dropping, and then you start getting like weird infections because these weather balloons burst and release, bacteria into different parts of your body. And so I ended up having sepsis regularly, but mostly it was just dropping kidney function.
Ah,
And it was towards the end, I made it down to 12% kidney function without going on dialysis. But man, you get up there, you eat breakfast, and then you're ready for a nap. And then you get up and you do one thing, and then you need another nap. It's a pretty grim existence.
what's the
So
survival rate of something like that?
ultimately, it's zero. Untreated. Well, that's not quite true.
Okay.
My mother had it as well. I inherited it from her, and thank God I didn't pass it on to any of my kids. She made it to age 72 and then died of something else.
Okay.
So she died of something else before the polycystic kidney disease could kill her.
Okay.
In my case, everybody's different. My disease either progressed faster or I did more damage to my kidneys. Years of judo, getting thrown, years of
Mm,
kickboxing, getting hit in the kidneys, years of, oh man, I'm super sore today. I just better pop a couple of ibuprofen, vitamin I.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Well, what is it? Tylenol destroys the liver and ibuprofen destroys the kidneys. And
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know. I can't
Yeah.
say for sure why my kidneys were failing in my mid 40s. I'm guessing those things that I did weren't good for it. Also, trying to be an athlete and eating really quite high protein.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, you need your protein. Well, yeah, that's true. But, your kidneys eventually have to filter all that stuff out. So uh,
That's
there's a
something.
trade-off.
I don't know. When I discuss it, it's very controversial with other people who train martial arts. They don't like me saying that like more often than not, because I think when people like something, they like all the possible selling points of it.
Mhm.
But what I tell people is like, don't train martial arts to get healthy. Like, if you want to get healthy, go do like moderate weightlifting, good cardio, good diet. That's to get healthy. If you do martial arts, you're gonna mess up your body eventually. You're a byproduct if you're training. Of course, it kind of everyone's different. If this is the only thing that motivates you to move, then yeah, okay, I guess that will get you healthier than you would have been otherwise, for sure. Everything is like if we start discussing
Agreed.
everything.
Anything's better than sitting on the couch
Yeah, so
and
of
eating
course, like,
Cheetos.
I know there's variables. I know there's nuance in life, and I know that motivation is a very powerful thing as well, and discipline as well. But what will some people like what will make them be disciplined? Like, so putting all that aside, let's say that someone would be equally motivated to do martial arts or to just go to the gym and do cardio and moderate weightlifting and stuff like that. If their only goal is to get healthy, martial arts is not the thing. What I think is often people are embarrassed to admit why they want to do martial arts, which is either I actually want to fight in a controlled environment, or I want to feel safer, or like, oh, I'm fascinated by the skills and everything, but maybe it seems too weird, or the techniques, or like, I don't want to look like some nerd in a gym of jocks, or like. So I think like people will have plenty of real reasons which they don't want to get into, and then they say, oh, I just want to get healthy, to kind of downplay their fascination and interest in learning it, especially if they're older. It's my
I
theory.
I don't I don't deny that my reasons for training martial arts have changed greatly over the years. When I wanted to do it at age 8, I wanted to be able to beat up other kids in the schoolyard. Then later I wanted to become a ninja,
Mm.
right? It was during the era of the ninja craze and at the
The
tail
80s.
end of the
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and the tail end of the Bruce Lee craze.
Yeah. They
So I
want
wanted to
to
be Bruce Lee and I
yeah,
wanted to be a ninja
yeah,
and still beat up kids in the schoolyard. Now I don't want to beat up kids in the schoolyard. It's nice to have, to know that there's a fairly good chance that I could defend myself if I had
yeah,
to. That
yeah,
that's a bonus. I'm not gonna throw that out, but really now, yes, I agree that martial arts isn't good for your body, but it is a lot of fun,
hmm,
and moving is good for your body.
yeah.
And knowing that I'm gonna have to go into the gym next week, and I'm gonna have to spar you, I'm gonna have to wrestle you, and I know you're bloody strong.
You'd
Ah,
win very quickly because you're using
well,
you. I'm joking. I know you mean other people at the gym.
but you're bloody strong, so I'm gonna go lift weights now, right, to improve
Mm,
my martial arts.
yes,
So, it can be a healthy lifestyle. I mean, I think honestly, the part that's not talked about uh, is the brain damage from contact
I
martial
think it
arts.
is now. Like I think
Mm,
that I because I don't compete. Kind of what happens for me. Like I always spar light, but if someone starts to up it up a bit, unless it went crazy, I actually don't tell them to mellow it out, because then I see those rare moments of like, okay, I guess now I'm gonna put myself to the test a bit more because I don't go compete or stuff like that. So, but normally I think it's kind of like I'm have zero shame in going like I'm going light to the head at least, and then
mhm.
like leg kicks, stuff like that. I don't mind being a bit more like meathead for leg kicks, and maybe tomorrow will walk a bit funny, but no, I think the brain it's something that's becoming more. People are more knowledgeable of it now.
People are more knowledgeable about
Yeah,
it, but you know who isn't as much? It's the young kids, right? Like, you've got kids in MMA programs. Okay, so
yeah,
maybe they don't spar full contact to the head, which is
yeah,
good. Some of them do, which is insane.
Yeah, kid, yeah,
But
underage.
how much informed consent can an 18-year-old male whose brain is basically a mess of hormones actually give, right? It's a tricky question. I would support your decision to go and become a full-time MMA fighter
Yeah,
more than I would some 18-year-old, right? It's kind of they're
I get
adults
where you're
by
coming
the
from.
law,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Hmm.
and you can't stop them.
But I think that's up to the
But
coaches and like I think the coaches these days, and I know that probably a lot of high end trainers would be like, who the fuck are you to be having an opinion on this? But I think it's also like I think as gyms become more modern and all that, like I think the idea of hard sparring should go out the window, except maybe at like if it's key moments. Like
yeah,
of course it has to have its play. You know, you want to find out if the guy can fight before he's in an actual fight. I also understand that,
yeah,
but maybe you know, moderately, because honestly, if the kid is 18 and wants to be a fighter, like he's gonna get hit. Yeah, so at that point, you know, like let's put out it's gonna happen. But the only thing I think is in the it's up to the trainers and the coaches to for them to have that mentality, kind of like the fighter going in the ring or the cage or whatever. Like you know, maybe he can't be thinking of quitting, so it's up to the team to throw the towel.
mm.
You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things. I don't know.
Yeah. There are still a lot of old school coaches around though who
Yes.
they like to just put their head down and brawl, and that's what really got them off.
Hmm.
Is okay, no defense, all offense. Let's just the two of us do milling, right? There's this rite of passage in some branches of the British military called milling. Have you ever heard of this?
No,
Basically, you and I, gloves. There's no like we can't dodge, we can't block,
just like the
we
mill,
can't
right?
do
Like
footwork. We have to stand
circles.
toe to toe, yeah, and just
Okay.
basically punch each other in the head as hard as we can, as fast as we can. And it makes a certain amount of sense, right? You want to weed out the people who fold under pressure, and that I imagine the pressure is pretty high, especially all your
Yeah.
teammates are cheering you on.
Hmm.
I get it. On the other hand, uh, that's yeah, that's not good for you. And I've seen sparring sessions cheered on by coaches that looked a lot like that milling.
Yeah, I think the thing is that I understand that in some, and this is really not an area of expertise of mine, but I understand in some areas of like in some professions, you kind of need to know who's made of what before their lives may be on the line, right? So that I understand, which is why like when people like when you talk about Marines or like maybe not like normal army infantry, but like if you're talking about Marines or like other very high end like special operations and stuff like that, like well, we might even consider maybe torture even. Like I understand that maybe it's part of the process to kind of weed out who would get killed very quickly or who would betray their teammates very quickly or who just wouldn't have the stuff. I get that. But again, if you're talking about the brain, like what's going to happen is the chin is such a weird thing. Like the chin, I know it's the brain is not
Yeah.
the chin, but someone in one like big war might as in fighting unarmed, when I say war in this case because I know it might get confusing, might leave their chin forever, and
Yep.
someone else might have like a lot of wars in them, and you don't know who's going to have how many. So I also
It's
think
amazing. I mean, if you go back in MMA history, the best
yeah.
example there is, I think, Chuck Liddell. I think he ended up getting,
Oh
towards
Jesus.
the end of his career, he was getting knocked out by guys with broken arms, getting hit by the arm that was broken. Right? So you have it's almost like you have a certain number of heavy shots to the head that you can take, and
Yeah,
light shots to the head because
as
light
well.
shots add up as well.
Yeah.
Boy, we're really going down the CTE rabbit hole, aren't we? But
Yeah, and I
there's a
mean, we
certain
shouldn't spend too much time on this because you have a lot of interesting stuff to say, but I guess we kind of did, yeah. And other
yeah.
experts have discussed it more thoroughly, but
But
and
you know
that's how
where it does
conversations
tie
go
in?
sometimes.
You know where
Yes,
it does tie in is the
tell me.
evaluation of risk. At
Okay.
least if one of the central principles for taking risk is
Hmm.
take risk for yourself.
Yes.
I don't care if you smoke. If you smoke cigarettes, I
Hmm.
think you're dumb. I don't think it's a good idea, but I don't
Hmm.
want to stop you. However, if you smoke in your car with your kids or you smoke in the room with me,
Yeah.
your act of smoking, the risk from that and the consequences from that don't only fall on your shoulders, they fall on your kids' shoulders and they fall on me. So one of the ideas of taking risk is only take risks for yourself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing how many people don't understand that distinction.
Oh,
And then another idea is to, just because you decide to take risks in one area, cool, but consider all the worst case scenarios and try to mitigate for them. So if you we know that, for example, to go back to the brain damage, that
yeah.
being dehydrated and taking shots to the head is really bad for you. So if you
Mhm.
are going to do hard sparring to sharpen your edge,
Yeah.
for God's sake, be hydrated. It says, or and focus on defense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, for example, you did some pretty risky stuff going into the wilderness of the subarctic and everything, but I think, that's the difference is that, for example, you are doing this because you want that experience. It's not gonna like affect anyone else, except maybe a
Uh,
bear if they catch you, but or your loved ones if they lose you, they would be sad. But also, you have your own life to live, so I think it's a whole conversation. But as opposed to someone who, oh, I love to grab my bike and go really fast on the highway. Well, now you're
mm,
affecting other people. Now it's not just you.
exactly.
So I get what you're saying. Also, I think before we move back to you properly, um, for example, even for myself, like there's like I have some pains here and there from training martial arts. Like foot that kind of hurts sometimes when it's cold, stuff like that. And but at the same time, I know that this version of me that exists now with this foot pain would mop the floor with a version of me who never trained. So then you also have kind of like, okay, what are you giving up for what? So there's like an exchange, right? The pros and cons, if you will. So if the pros for you personally as an individual outweigh the cons, then go for it. So I don't mind that my foot sometimes hurts when it's a bit cold, a little bit. It's not even serious, but I don't know when I get older, but um, because I got something out of it that I think it's a good trade. Like so you go in the wilderness, you do something like go to the subarctic and you got you got stuff out of it that you needed to like you were thinking about it for 20 years. That's not nothing. Like,
Yeah, it's not nothing. And you're right. Like
yeah,
at the first level, if I drown in a lake or get eaten by a bear or whatever, burned up in a forest fire,
yeah.
it is just me. Now, as a parent, you can't just think about yourself. So that's the second order effect, right?
Yes, yes.
Which is what you referred to.
Hmm.
So, I think arguably there's this weird pattern of as far as I'm concerned, as I'm declaring myself the moral arbiter of the world, and I'm saying you have a right to take more risk when you're young before kids, and you have a right to take more risk when you're old after you've raised them. If
Man,
if I'm 80 years old and I
yeah,
decide to climb Everest and I know that there's a 50% chance I'm going to die, I don't think that's a tragedy if I die. 80-year-old man
hmm,
dies climbing Mount Everest is not a tragedy.
it's pretty
That's
cool.
kind of a cool story.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
father of four and sole caregiver of four dies on Everest. That's a tragedy that goes beyond him. Or maybe it's a stupidity, or maybe it's a moral failing. So yes, I did do this trip, and yes, there were dangerous aspects to it.
hmm,
But at every step, I tried to mitigate the risk as much as possible. Yeah, and then we can get into the specifics of that, but I always tried to think about what could go wrong, and then what would I do if things went wrong. It's just like martial arts again. If if we're rolling on the ground and you catch me in an armbar, that is not the time for me to figure out how to get out of an armbar. The
no,
time for me to figure that out is before. There's three ways I like to get out of an armbar. I'm going to try method one, then I'm going to try method two, then I'm going to try method three. And I've trained them before, and now I'm deploying them because I've thought about it before. I've been realistic. I could get caught in an armbar. Similarly, having thought about what am I going to do if I run into a bear on this portage? What am I going to do if I swamp in these rapids and my boat gets washed away? What am I going to do if this forest fire that's around the corner from me catches up to me? What are my plans? Because it's easier to draw from a small number of preordained solutions. Armbar defense number one,
yeah,
armbar defense number two, armbar defense number three, than
hmm,
it is to try and come up with some magical innovation in real time. Sometimes you have to do that,
Yeah.
but it's just same as firefighting. We have a basic plan to put out a house fire. It doesn't always work, but at least you start with a plan.
Yeah. And the more you have a variety of plans, the more if this doesn't work, you can fall back. Well, now we're talking about jujitsu as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
If this doesn't work, let's do it, this, and then maybe at some point you understand the fundamentals so well, or the notions of how to firefight or how to roll, and that you can even kind of like understand the logistics of something. Um, like I think a lot of like blue belts like me, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, but when we're rolling, sometimes we might get out of stuff that we don't necessarily, we wouldn't be able to explain it after, just because we're starting to understand some logistics of how things work. So maybe after a fact, like, oh, what happened, I don't know, but in the moment I
I've been a
figured
black
out,
belt. I've been a black
oh,
belt for almost 20 years,
yeah,
and there are still times that I end up in a position that I've never been here before.
yeah.
That's kind of fun. That's like
Yeah,
that
but
is
you're a black
why.
belt. What I mean is, for me, like I mean, for you, of course, but for me, it's kind of like, I think it's fascinating to me that even at my low level of understanding, the mechanics of it are starting to kind of like, no, I couldn't explain it. I suck at explaining jiu-jitsu to people, like, but someone might catch me to something I have no idea what this is about. Like, I
Mhm.
like legs. Dude, I'm in a place, they gave me the blue belt, and I had barely, like, I barely understand how legs work, and I haven't gotten a stripe since then. I moved, and a lot of stuff happened, and so I still don't understand legs. I don't know how to do leg locks properly or anything like that. But there's times when people try to catch me, and I might get out just from understanding just the mechanics of the human body at this point, at
Okay.
least as far as I. So it's kind of what I mean. It's just like, so if you have been firefighting for years, you've seen, okay, this kind of tree will catch fire like this kind of tree like this, and okay, this is what we're supposed to do. So I guess at some point you just catch a fundamental understanding of something where you might improvise.
For
Where
sure.
all the scenarios are gone, and now you start improvising when you need to, and maybe after a fact, like, oh, Stefan, why did you do that? Like, it was just the
Oh,
thing that, yeah,
yeah, and then there are different scales of decision making as well. If you and I are kickboxing and I throw a jab at your head, you don't have time to go, well, should I do option number 1, option number 2, or option number 3?
yeah,
But if we're rolling and things are slower,
hmm,
then you have more time. Option
yes,
1, option 2, option 3. If we're
yeah,
talking about other scenarios, I don't know, you want to buy a car and you are looking at 3 different cars. You can do quite a lot of research. Well, the mileage on this is this, but this has been repaired, and here's the previous owner, and this is a color that I don't like. You have way more time to evaluate things. But
yeah,
you get somebody throws a jab at your head, you don't have a lot of time to think.
no,
You've you're
that's what
running
sparring is for.
whitewater.
That's what
Yeah,
sparring is for.
yeah, yeah.
um
You're running whitewater, and your boat gets stuck on a rock.
mhm,
You you have to do the right thing right away, and then try and figure it out. Right? You have to stabilize the situation.
okay, that's fascinating. Like, you, okay, let's try to get a subarctic properly without going
Sure.
into satellite, and then we can move on to other very interesting things as well. But um so when you went to do that, how long were you gone? How long did, because you were by yourself, right? Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah. It was a solo trip,
Okay.
and I left the day after my wedding. In my defense, in my defense, I had had that departure day set before she proposed. So,
Okay. Oh,
uh,
and she proposed.
well, we'd been together for years, and she'd telling me, "I'm never getting married. Don't even ask me. I don't. I do not ever want to get married again." I'm like, okay, she never wants to get married again. So
Hmm.
then, when she decided that she did want to get married again, she was in a bit of a pickle. So she ended up proposing, and you know, I would have asked earlier, but um, she had told me not to. So there you go.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah, I set out for 50 days. I had food and gear for 50 days. It ended up taking 41 or 42 days, so a little bit of buffer at the end.
Hmm.
And if you know Canada, I started in northern Saskatchewan, like
Okay.
pretty far north. It's not at all like southern Saskatchewan. It's much more like the Ottawa area actually. It's Canadian Shield, but with less soil. So northern Saskatchewan, northern Manitoba, and then up into Nunavut. So crossing 60 degrees latitude and out onto the tundra, and then down across the tundra for uh, hundreds of kilometers anyway, probably 800 kilometers down to Arviat, which is a tiny Inuit town on Hudson Bay.
And you were doing it on your book. You have I might get the term. Is it a canoe? Is it a like
Uh,
a sorry? I don't know the terms. I
it's a
apologize.
canoe kayak hybrid. So
Okay.
it's long and skinny like a kayak, but has an open top like a canoe. There's never the perfect. It'd be like doing a road trip across, across the continent. For the highway, you want one kind of car, preferably something fast with radar detection or
Hmm.
lidar detection. But now you're in the dirt road and you don't want that anymore. You want a Jeep or a Forerunner or something.
Yeah.
And then you're crossing a river and now you want, like an ATV type of thing. So
Yeah.
there's no one perfect boat. This boat was pretty good at going into the wind and crossing large lakes.
Okay.
Not so good in whitewater and not so good for holding equipment. It
Okay.
was pretty crowded in there.
You keep mentioning whitewater.
Mhm.
Did you encounter whitewater?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so can you explain, and even my understanding of it, I'm sure is maybe even wrong, but can you explain whitewater and how you had to deal with it to avoid injury or death?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, fundamentally, rivers fall off of higher areas and go towards lower places, right? We take a look at the St. Lawrence River. It starts in the center of North America, where
Mhm.
the elevation's higher, and it flows downhill to the ocean. And the
Okay.
ocean is basically zero elevation. So as rivers fall off the the, the continent, they go down. Sometimes they go down steeply, and sometimes they go down gradually. Uh, when they go down steeply, you end up with rapids. You end up with waterfalls and rapids, and there's a whole procedure for evaluating them, for sometimes running them, portaging around them, and it if you know what you're doing, then there again, it's like jujitsu being a white belt versus a blue belt versus being a black belt. If you don't know what you're doing, it looks like a big froth of white,
Okay.
and you're like, oh my god, you would die, and maybe you would, and maybe you wouldn't. And now you're more experienced. You go, oh no, this is actually pretty easy. This looks intimidating,
Okay.
but but if you wipe out in it, there's a big lake below, it's warm water. You get a fun bouncy ride and then nothing. And sometimes it's the other way. Something that looks pretty easy has actually got a deadly trap in it. A classic example there might be some of the dams that are on the rivers in the south. When a dam goes straight across a river and all
Hmm.
that water pours over smoothly, it might not be a big drop, but if you get caught in that recirculation at the bottom of the dam, you're probably going to die.
Oh, interesting. I
So
know as a young man, I almost went down some falls because the water was still on the top.
okay, so
Or,
you got
or
fooled into.
visually it looks still, and it wasn't.
Okay,
So,
yeah, so
yeah.
that's a
I had to hold on to a rock, and like a friend threw a towel at me, and I grabbed the towel, and that's pretty
okay,
crazy. Yeah, that
yeah.
was. But yeah, so okay, so that's okay.
Yeah,
So
it's a whole set of skills and to some extent equipment that you
yeah,
need to deal with this. You need the technology and you need the experience, and you can at least put the odds in your favor.
yeah. And why did you want to do that? I don't know if you can even explain it, but I guess if you were to try, or maybe you didn't. I'm pretty sure you did in your book. But what's the name of your book, by the way? Can you show? I think is that behind you? Can you show it to the?
Why, yes, yes, it would be behind me. Oh,
You
look.
should probably promote it a bit better.
Perseverance, life and death in the subarctic.
Uh, Good thing. Okay, so
Yeah.
it wasn't Deliverance. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
There were no banjos.
No,
There were
that
no
would be a whole
hillbillies.
other. That would be a whole other problem.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a
And
bad joke.
yeah.
Yeah. So
So
yeah.
where were we? Why the
Well,
hell
I
did I
asked
do
you,
it?
yeah, why you did that, yeah, and then I made a really lousy joke, yeah.
Oh, you wouldn't be the first person
Okay.
to accuse me of doing untoward things in the
No,
wilderness,
no, no, I
but
didn't mean you would be
yeah.
the. I just meant like you. like, I don't know. I feel like it ends with
I work
ants.
in a fire
Gets
hall.
there.
There's no accusation you can throw at me that hasn't been thrown at me by 9 in the morning, just at a regular day
Those
at the
bad
coffee
jokes
table.
and no, I meant more in the context like you have to like be careful of the dangers of the movie. But again, really bad joke. I apologize. Okay, no, seriously. You wanted to do this for 20 years. What was the
A couple of different reasons. I think I've always used the outdoors as a place of, you know, processing difficult things. So I had four brothers when I was young, and then in a span of a couple of years, two of them died. Two of them died being 21-year-old guys, doing stupid shit that, that age when young men think that they're going to live forever.
mhm,
And in both cases, my approach to processing that, and it wasn't deliberate. It wasn't like, I must go out into the wilderness in order to process this trauma. It
mhm,
wasn't like that at all. But it's like, man, I really need to get out. I need to get out. I need to get out into the bush. And I guess unconsciously, I was trying to get out into that space to, for one, I find the wilderness extremely healing. Healing is kind of a woo woo term, but it works in this context for me.
mhm,
And two, by doing it alone, because I also go out in the wilderness with people, I'm not a complete loner. Uh, it creates that space to process, right? It creates by going out in the wilderness, by being alone, and then by doing something physical to kind of take your waking mind and occupy that with the minutia of travel. I find it creates that space for feelings and uh, sort of deep thinking or deep processing to occur.
mhm,
So that's how I've always approached loss and trauma and death around me. So now this was kind of to deal with my own near death experience, right? And there's nothing, we all theoretically know that we're going to die someday,
yep,
but it's really quite another thing to be going, yeah, yeah, I'm going in for surgery now. I hope I wake up. And
mhm,
if there wasn't this surgery available, if there wasn't modern medicine, I'd be uh, I'd be dead. And if I was in the States and I had the surgery, I'd be broke and bankrupt.
oh my
So,
god, yeah,
I'm so grateful that I'm alive now and not 50 years ago or not 100 years ago or not 1,000 years ago,
yeah,
and that I'm in a place where there's a decent medical program like
yeah,
most of the industrialized world.
which is why like generally speaking, I'm not into cutting the taxes.
Yeah,
I'm into using them correctly. That's
of
a
course.
different
And
conversation.
there's
But
of course there are
um,
inefficiencies that should
yeah,
be fixed. Of course,
but I'm
like
happy to pay
any
taxes to
system.
live in a society that makes sense. It's
Yeah.
yeah, because like
So,
yeah, it's
sorry.
just we're very lucky to be in Canada. Yeah, we're like
Well, just eventually we'll all be the 51st state and life will be even better. Don't you worry.
fuck that shit, man.
Yeah.
It's like it's so funny the arrogance of any American who think any no sorry any United Statesian, because I think like them calling themselves American might give them some in some of them false notions about like the whole continent and them. Uh,
Mm,
so I'm half jokingly, half seriously calling United Statesian when I think of it, because the force of habit.
mhm.
And I think that any person from the United States who understands what's going on, I don't think would blame me. And anyone who would get angry at it is the kind of person I don't mind if they get angry. Um, but yeah, no, I think for them to not understand why we really wouldn't want to, it's just like it speaks volumes, right? About how like
Yeah.
they're and some of them
Well,
maybe
there
half.
are Canadians, there are fifth column Canadians, something like 10% in most of the country and about 20% in Alberta, who do want to join the United States. That speaks to the power of social media. If you're drowning in an environment where you're being told how shit Canada is every moment of every day, and you're being told how great America is and how much better life would be, then, low information voters are, some of them will be swayed. And it's hard to underestimate the effect of just drowning in misinformation. So, Uh, I think, unfortunately, before the United States tried to take over Canada, say they were going to do it in 2 years' time, just
Hmm.
picking a random date, they wouldn't just invade in 2 years' time. They would spend $1 billion on bots and social media campaigns and hiring
Oh,
Jordan Peterson
we're already
and Joe
seeing.
Rogan
Yeah,
to get on that soapbox and
yeah.
try and bring that up from 10% of Canadians to 25% of Canadians.
Oh, man. And like I think we're in a era of, and okay, I think you and I are like, I guess let's address this because it's kind of why I started following you online. Because for a while there, when Trump started his new term, which is he's trying to turn into like a fascist regime. And I don't say that lightly. I'm not a kind
Mhm.
of progressive person who's calling everything conservative fascism. Like I'm half Spanish. My dad has memories of Franco's,
Of actual fascism.
yeah, of actual fascism. So I've never been a kind of progressive to throw that term around like willy nilly. Never, never, ever. So when I say that I think that Trump now acts like a fascist, I trust me when I say I didn't say that during his first term. After January 6th, the idea was floating in my head, but I was like, okay, now that goof is behind us now, which I was wrong, unfortunately. But so when I say that, anyone who thinks like, oh, like typical liberal, no, 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 this is the first time I ever like actually addressed to, at least in terms of North America, to a politician in power in North America as a fascist. It's the very first time I ever like openly go like, yeah, that's a fascist. So because I don't take that term lightly.
You
Um,
could make an argument that McCarthyism in the 1950s was an incipient fascist movement, but
I wouldn't know
but
enough
but
about
they
that.
didn't have power in the way that an entire administration has power now. I mean,
Yeah.
fascism, as you said,
Yeah.
doesn't mean things I don't like. For
Mhm. Mm,
example, I don't like Bolshevism, but Bolshevism is not fascism. So when somebody calls you, you fucking Bolshevik, communist, Marxist,
yeah.
fascist, socialist, homo, I
Dude,
mean, those are not the same
but
thing.
but
You
people don't
actually
even know
can't be
like
a Bolshevist and a fascist at the same time.
what's funny about
They're
a lot of
different.
like those like conservatives online. They praise a lot of like very white. They don't realize their own trains of thought and thought patterns. Like they praise a lot of like very like Viking like countries. Like Scandinavian or whatever term. Or, like Norway.
Nordic countries.
Yeah, Nordic. Like
We
where like
mean white, but we
yeah,
don't want to
exactly,
say
exactly.
white, so we'll say
But
Nordic.
what they don't realize, like they look at those countries and they in their heads they think, oh, those countries are amazing because it's all they preserve their culture. Like, look, if you look at Netflix movies from Norway and stuff like that, there's people from everywhere there as well. They don't realize that they're doing so well not because they're white. They're doing so well because they actually have a lot of like socialist inspired politics, like universal healthcare. And okay, even I won't call it free healthcare. We pay with it for it with our taxes, but in the United States is the only country that's I think is it the only country that's a democracy that doesn't have universal health care? Is it?
It's the only industrialized country. So there may be smaller countries that are not
Yeah, yeah.
democracies that are, but
So
of the major industrialized countries, it's the
so
only
they look
one.
at those countries and they're doing so well, and like they have these like very misguided notions of why they're doing so well. Like, why the quality of life is so good. Like, and they really think it has to do with ethnicity, but um,
I
it,
think just for the record,
yeah,
I mean, so your dad is Spanish,
yeah,
so grew up under Franco.
yeah. As a
My
kid,
dad,
you know,
my dad grew up in the tail end of World War II under Hitler.
hmm
My my mom, my mom's father, so my grandfather on that side, grew up in Switzerland, basically at the borders, defending against German fascists, and I
yeah.
suppose Italian fascists. Although the odds of the Italian fascists invading Switzerland, I don't think there was ever a serious plan to do that, but you didn't know.
Well,
So
I
I
mean,
think we have to define fascism.
Mussolini was certainly overshadowed. Franco and Mussolini were certainly overshadowed by Hitler, but and I guess Franco was more like Spain was kind of just like in the grand scheme of things more isolated than Italy was, but Italy was no joke either, and you know, like and then the danger of what it represented at that time, like
Yeah. But I mean, I think a pretty good definition of fascism is an ultranationalistic populist
Yes.
movement
Yeah.
that's grounded in the idea of a mythic past. And actually, I'll ask you about this because obviously Hitler's Third Reich was grounded in the idea of the First and Second Reich, right? The era of Charlemagne and then the era of Bismarck. And we
Hmm.
have to get back. We have to make Germany great again. And Mussolini was obviously grounded in Rome. We have to make Italy great again. And you take a look at the fascist architecture of pre World War II, it's basically an attempt to recreate Rome bigger and more beautiful. What era was the Spanish fascists pointing back to? Like the era of Ferdinand and
Well, because
Isabella, or
yeah, because the thing is, Spain, Spain was an empire once upon a time. Like,
mm,
and they discovered America, and they didn't really. Anyone who wasn't looking at the camera now did quote marks. Of course, they didn't discover America. America was already populated, but as Europeans, they
mm,
apparently Vikings were there first. So Spain was a kingdom, and they were like
empire?
a world power. Wait, were they an empire, or they were a world power though? And now my
Mm,
history's failing me. What's interesting about people who still miss Franco to this day, like people who never knew the era, or like in the 90s when I was a kid, like if you went to small towns, you still had like street streets with names of like Frankist generals, or people like apparently like remembering the era of Franco as if it was amazing. It wasn't. My dad was really hungry as a kid. Like they only had fruits for Christmas. That was like fruits, like oranges, were like a Christmas thing. And they were really poor. Like people were hungry overall, and lots of injustices from the police, or whatever they were called at that moment. Um, a lot of people disappeared. Like there's a documentary. I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but it's The Silence of Others is the name in English, and and I'm gonna kind of make a parallel between the U.S. right now and Spain, and what the difference is, in my opinion, at this moment. But Spain used to be a world power, so I guess to answer your question. But I'll transition to a thought that I kind of want to get off my chest, and since we're on the subject matter. And this guy, this artist made statues to commemorate the victims of Franco, and the statues were out in a field. It wasn't like in a museum; it was outside in a field. And the day they were announced, like, oh, they're done, that's it, blah blah blah. Like the night of, or something like that. They explained in the documentary. Someone went and shot the statues with a gun and left, and so there's bullet holes in it. And the artist said, now with this, my work is complete.
uh,
With this act that someone like shot at, like the representation of the victims of Franco. So Franco killed a lot of Spaniards, and of course, you have like the people saying that Franco was awesome will say that that was not true, and but there's like he killed a lot of people, and also like the what's kind of horrible, and I'm getting back to the U.S. in a moment with this. What's kind of horrible about Spanish politics is that um, they call it the el gran olvido, so the great forgetting or something like that. So kind of like what happened is there was a lot of leftist political prisoners after Franco's regime that were still in like the democratic Spain, were still in prison. They didn't like release them, and there are a lot of very right wing people in power who were there during Franco's time. So that it was kind of like a very weird transition into democracy. Apparently facilitated by a royal family, but I don't know the details of that. But somehow, I'm not sure how. But what happened was the politicians in the right, they kind of went, okay, so we need to have a great forgetting. We have to let go of all the grudges, and we'll release a lot of prisoners, but we have to kind of like, no one can be held liable for what happened in the past. And the leftists of the era were really happy because that meant they're freeing other political prisoners, everything they did. Okay, we forget everything now. But that was actually a tool used so that all the people who tortured civilians, all the people who worked for Franco,
mm,
would not have to face any repercussions for the war crimes they committed during Franco's era. So now I'm getting around to something.
sure.
What's interesting about the Americans who praise Trump right now, after like obviously he's not into freedom, obviously he's not into free speech, obviously he's not into protecting the little, but they still praise him and all that. In Spain, of course, the people who believe in Franco will downplay what he did or pretend it didn't happen or have far out reasons for why it was justified somehow. But what you will get is people actually saying, yeah, fascism was better than this. So, in their
Mm.
opinion, of course, they have like a very distorted view of how horrible fascism is. But at the very least, it sounds really fucked up, I know. But at least when you talk to these people, at least you have a starting point where you're talking like democracy versus fascism. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but at least you have that starting point where the person
Mm.
is actually saying, yeah, when Franco was a fascist and he was controlling the whole country, was much better than, I don't know, scattered politicians arguing. Okay, I will never be behind that argument, but at least you have that argument to begin with, where you're kind of like on the same page of understanding what you're each arguing for. What's maddening about Americans for Trump right now is that they don't realize he's a fascist, and I'm like, why? So there's so much.
I think that's about to change, but I'll go into
Okay,
that in a second.
but the thing is, even the people, they were being asked, what if he could stay president forever, instead of, oh yeah, that would be amazing. And so everything that they were like, a lot of them, when you interview them, they're arguing for fascism. They don't realize it. But why
Yeah.
is that? And then I realized it's a brainwash. It's the same way that people didn't remember how fucking bad things were with Franco, how hungry they were and stuff like that. With Trump, it's kind of like, because since they were kids, what's great about America? Because that nationalism has nothing to do with logic and argument. It's how it makes you feel. If you
Mhm.
feel like your country is so amazing, it's the best in the world, we're the best people in the world, our country is the best, blah blah blah. So because it was so linked, people were like, in the U.S., the United States are so amazing because of freedom. It becomes a mantra, and again, it has nothing to do with logic. So at that point, why is it amazing? Because we have freedom, and the leftists are against freedom because they want to be communists. And I don't think. And the thing about me as a progressive, is I really don't take communism lightly either, because I think a lot of progressives, they're very forgiving with communism. I'm not, but I think I'm mostly centrist leaning left, but that's beside the point. Because well, I'm not gonna get into it now, but my wife's family is from a country who suffer a lot under communism, so. But let's not get too scattered. So I take both extremes very, very seriously. Is my
Mm.
point.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
It's
take the
funny
freedom
how
thing. So they
how
don't realize they're arguing for fascism. They because of the mantra is freedom. So they're in their minds, they cannot reconcile that. They just want to go with the feeling that they're great, and they stick to why they were told that the country is great. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I think that's about to change, and not for the better. When I've had discussions or arguments with people in the past about these are fascist tendencies. So a couple of years ago, say, here is a fascist tendency, the mythologization of the past,
Hmm.
uh, the the uh, the use of propaganda, the uh, anti-intellectualism,
Yeah,
the worship of strength. Hang on. Strength isn't all bad, Stefan. Yeah, and
I
I
mean, you're a
agree.
martial artist, you would know.
Yeah, strength is important.
Yeah.
But when you worship it and at the expense of everything else, and you check all the other boxes, then you end up with something bad. So
Mhm.
arguing that it's not fascism. But what you're about to see is people go, yeah, it is fascism, and yeah, we like it.
You think
If
we're getting
what it,
there? They're they're
I think it's going to pivot very soon. I think, yep. I mean, you see it in the rise of the the Nazi sympathizers.
Mhm.
You see it in the rise of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
You see it in the rise of the worship of Viktor Orban and Putin. Putin's not a fascist, but it's an authoritarian regime,
Well,
and
he
fascism.
was literally like, that's a funny thing. Conservatives like being very forgiving towards Russia and Putin. Like, Putin was an actual communist agent. He was a KGB agent. He
Mm,
was an actual communist.
yeah.
At least in the
Well,
sense that they
yeah.
hate. Okay, look, I don't want to. Like,
Yeah.
I know that. I know there's the
Yeah.
communism in theory, then there's the communism people
Yeah.
put in practice, and but in the context that conservatives think of communism as this bad thing, Putin was actually it.
No, it turns out that the most important thing is to hate the same people that you hate.
Yes,
On my
and that
podcast,
Putin
I've talked.
and that Putin has a black belt in judo, so he's strong,
Yeah, he's got to be
manly.
strong,
He's manly. Yeah,
and he
yeah,
hates the gays,
yeah. Very
and
important,
strength,
strength.
strength.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
riding
and
on
there's nothing wrong
a
with strength, and
horse
strength is
military.
important.
Yeah, yeah, it is important, and and I think that's the thing that like I'm having this hangover of Roganism, where back when Joe Rogan was a liberal, well, at least liberal aligned enough. It was kind of like it was cool to have like this guy talk about manly stuff who would still go like, yeah, universal healthcare makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it was like before he kind of
Basically, the communist idea of universal healthcare.
super communist, like all those communist countries practicing
Yeah,
it, like all of Europe.
yeah.
Uh, and yeah, it's just how we get to this, like what happened, like, but the
Yeah.
misinformation is
Well,
very
I
real,
think
like yeah, like
yeah.
you
I mean,
you mm,
MMA has always been a little bit on the right? So that's one thing.
very much so, actually, I would say, yeah, yeah,
And uh, how did we get to Joe Rogan? I would argue that the fact that he became not quite a billionaire, but at last count, I think the estimates were he's made $450 million from his Spotify deals,
hmm
not to mention the various dick pills and alpha brain supplements that he's sold. So he's not quite a billionaire, but he's definitely in a very different tax bracket. He's trying to get to the 0% tax bracket that most
how messed
billionaires
up,
seem to
how
live
messed
in.
up is that? Yeah, he suddenly moved to
So,
Texas when he had the big Spotify deal. Was it
oh
really the
yeah.
pandemic or was it the taxes? uh,
And then the pandemic broke his brain too. Like all of
well,
a sudden,
yeah, I think he's a comedian. He's like I think he's one of those people who like he really wants to be. He pretends that he doesn't care, but I think he really wants to be like liked by people and all that. And I think what happened was, um, the like left alliance media turned on him, and then like it didn't feel good. But the conservatives were like patting him on the back, and that felt good. So I think that's what happened. I think it's all just emotion based, and
yep.
um and
Yeah.
then of course like you get
And
rewarded, and like by like the guests and um, the alliances and all that, as I'm sure it felt good to him, and from there it was all. I don't think he'll have Bill Burr ever again on, because I don't think he wants to have Bill Burr on again.
yeah. Well, I mean, look at all his health experts that he interviews, right? Andrew Huberman,
Yeah,
uh, again and again and again. And Rhonda Patrick used to be on there all the time. And then Rhonda Patrick disagreed with him about vaccines. Poof, never again. I mean,
yeah,
good for her because she had to know that there would be pushback. And here's an interesting story. I don't think I should name names, but I know a guy who's been on Rogan twice
okay,
to promote uh, essentially one of his enterprises, one of his own enterprises. And he was on Rogan in the early 2000s. Uh, and he said he got a whole bunch of followers and a whole bunch of prospects and a whole bunch of publicity. And the people who started following him were, maybe a little bit goofy, but generally like good-hearted, like maybe hippie types. And then he was on again, I want to say in 2021. It might have been 2022. And the followers that he got from that were completely different, just angry and hate-filled, and at the same time playing the victim card, but just filled with hatred for the other.
yeah,
And it was a very different group of followers that he got from the two times that he was on Rogan. These two snapshots, old Rogan, and then
yeah.
new post-pandemic Rogan.
I mean, the problem is that I think, oh, this is going to be nuanced. I almost want to be careful I say it, but I think what happened is, the media on the left went after him so hard that they, admittedly, there's some things that they said that were not exactly that, and that was weaponized to then justify a lot of misinformation that Rogan would say, because then he could point to, look, they lied about that about me, but that doesn't mean that
Yeah.
everything was a lie, but that kind of compromised the
The
whole.
word the media does a lot of heavy lifting there. Just because some fucking idiot on some blog took a quote completely out of context and then made up a clickbaity headline.
No, but
That's
even,
not
yeah,
the media.
but
Like I
even some stuff that was said, like the problem is that like some stuff that was said wasn't it, and but a lot of stuff was true as well. A lot of criticism was very earned, but they went so hard after him that they did. I don't want to get into it too much, but some stuff was not like exactly what happened, and then he kind of used it And then of course, like every time someone goes like, "Well, this thing he said doesn't make sense." Oh no, no, but they're always lying about him. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah,
This argument that you
kind of
can never
weaponized.
trust the media is an essential part of fascism again,
Oh
right?
yeah, for sure.
Uh,
No, no, I'm not
I
saying
mean,
you
there's a
never.
term in German called Lügenpresse. I don't know for sure, but I'm 100% sure Spanish has got the same phrase or the same idea was used in pre-fascist Spain. So Lügenpresse means the lying press, essentially, uh, fake news,
Well, it's
and
people
that was
stop
started.
trusting the institutions. That's the problem. They stop trusting the institutions, and then
Yep,
they think nothing can be done with the current system,
yep,
which is not
and
true. Like it's
let's
discouraging, but
smash it all to the ground.
yeah, because when you look at Bernie Sanders, when you look, like that guy is part of the system. He's always fighting. Like so. It's not true. But if people believe that the system will never do anything, that it can never be fixed, then they're ready to burn it down. Because then everything, but apparently a big part of it was because Reagan removed a law that existed so that news would have like an even-handed approach to explaining it, giving information in news. So for example, even if they were like if a news outlet was conservative aligned, they still had to, there was like a fairness act in news or something like that. I forget the name now, where they still had to present the other side of the coin. However, like this is the counter argument to that, and Reagan got
Yeah.
rid of that. So there's a lot of places in the world, like farming communities and in the US, where like they just started, they didn't have to have any balance in the news anymore. It was just like, this is the information we're going to feed you, this is what we're going to go with. And you're working on the farm, and like they got the speakers and the radio blasting all day, this is what you hear all day.
Well, I'll go one more German term, the Völkischer Beobachter. Obviously, I understand the German example the best.
Okay.
I do want to emphasize, as you said and I said, that well, not all fascists are Nazis, and Nazism is a type of fascism. It's not the only kind of fascism, but it is the type of fascism that I understand the best.
Hmm.
The Völkischer Beobachter was the Fox News of the Nazi Party. It was the official. I mean, first it was a newspaper, and then it became, as guess what, reporters and alternate media and all the mainstream media was shut down. It became more and more important, and it created a world in which people live.
Yeah.
So it the attempt to basically sue the mainstream media institutions
Well, that's what
into
Trump is doing.
non-existence.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Is an
Is it?
attempt
Yeah.
to begin to muzzle all other voices.
Yeah. It's crazy because now I kind of regret, like, even in this very channel in the past, I've mentioned like I mentioned Roland, or I remember years ago, like if talking to coworkers about my interests, like even just saying that I liked MMA, and I'm like kind of like in retrospect, I have crazy thoughts now. Where I'm like, man, do they think that because of that I'm pro Trump now? Like it's a ridiculous thought, but it's kind of
I
like
think
the.
it's actually important to have people who like, as if you just have some, let's take the stereotype
Mhm.
of the blue-haired, shrill feminist yelling about pronouns. And if
Yeah.
she doesn't like Dana White and she doesn't like this ultimate fist fighting championship
Mm.
or whatever she calls it,
Yes.
you know, she may have valid points, but she's never going to make any progress. I think it's really important to have people within the art of jiu-jitsu, within, the greater sphere of MMA, talking about this shit because it means that, there are people who are a little bit more like them, right? It's not, you know, maybe, I actually really hope that somebody grabs my book. Ah, this guy is clearly not a pussy liberal. Yeah, he's got a gun. Yeah, I have a gun. I've got more than one gun, actually. Uh,
And it follows you online, like, what the fuck?
yeah, exactly. That, or what's this idea about taking risk only for yourself and trying to mitigate risk when it falls on the shoulders of the others? What
Yeah.
a kind of a commie idea is that? So
Yeah.
that
Right.
that would be hilarious to me,
Yeah.
and I can only really hope that it happens.
Or just people drawing the conclusions just from what you posted. Let's say
I
about
mean,
empathy, or like something empathetic. They're like, "Hey, pussy," like.
I did once get featured on a neo-Nazi site. I'm not going to mention the name of it, but they in their discussion forum. They were like, "Hey, do you know any good self-defense?" It's like, "Yeah, that Stephan Kesting guy's got some pretty good stuff." And at the time, I had Google Alerts set up so that when somebody mentioned my name, it would send a little email to me. It's like,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah, so just shaved-headed white guy,
Right.
uh, because I look somewhat like a neo-Nazi, uh,
Uh,
or I
yeah.
and I'm fine with it. Like but
No, I
it's
think
a
in this day and age, it's not like a dude with shaved head anymore. It's just like
yeah,
instead of the come over, or if you do martial arts,
yeah,
so there's a lot of reason people like men do it now. It's not,
yeah.
but
This was a while ago. This was
I don't
more
know.
than
Yeah.
this is about 20 years ago.
Oh
So
yeah,
it
around
was a little bit less common.
yeah,
But they just assumed, right? They looked at me and assumed that
yeah.
uh, I must be a member of the tribe.
So let's talk about martial arts a little bit too, to
Sure.
lighten up the mood a bit, because I don't think rambling about these, not rambling, discussing. Sorry, we've been discussing very important things, but to try to end on a more fun note, because we're running out of an hour now. So we're nearing the end, but let's talk some fun stuff. To lighten up the mood. You okay? So I know you're a black belt in BJJ, but looking you up online, I saw mention of other martial, combat submission wrestling. Is that Eric Paulson's?
Yep. Yep.
So that's like catch
It's just
wrestling mixed with. Go ahead, if you want.
yeah. It's essentially from the catch wrestling lineage, and catch wrestling is a really interesting thing because uh, I mean
Yeah.
it's not really unified. It was kind of a tradition of carnival wrestling that ran the full gamut from you and I are going to have a fake match
Hmm.
and we'll encourage people to bet on it to I'll go into the ring and I'll see which of the local townspeople can stay in the ring with me to types of wrestling that existed throughout England. Like England has a whole bunch of really weird wrestling systems, some of which look more like, I don't know, those various
Sumo, or
Mongolia. Exactly.
yeah, or
Exactly.
kind of like a sort of judo, or yeah.
There's a Swiss form of wrestling with the unfortunate name of Schwingen. So it sounds like they're swingers, where you can grab the other guy's lederhosen, you get a grip, and you try and basically
Yeah.
dump them on their butt. And that same type of wrestling exists in the UK. So yeah, there's this long, complex web of things that essentially went into catch wrestling,
Mm.
and
Well, it's
then
catch as
catch
catch can.
wrestling.
It's just basically people going like, "Hey, whatever you can catch, you can do. Like
Yeah,
if you catch the arm, you catch the leg, whatever, just do
yeah,
whatever you can." So it's almost more of a mindset than a proper system. Like,
yeah. Although there were
I mean,
people
it's a
who
proper
taught it.
system for people to practice it, but I mean, like
Yeah,
the term catch, it's kind of almost
yeah.
like it catches
The
everything, right?
catch all.
Catch all. There you go. Yeah.
And then catch kind of ended up going to Japan and coming up through Shuto and Pancrase, and they evolved their MMA systems actually before the UFC. I'd heard about mixing punching and kicking and grappling and takedowns from Danny Inosanto in the late '80s when this Shuto thing was beginning to evolve in Japan. It
Yeah.
was pro wrestling, but then sometimes they would have real matches as well.
Well, but that's where
And I
Eric
remember,
Paulson came into, right? He was doing
yeah,
judo. Sorry, I
yeah,
interrupted, but yeah.
yeah. So that's But then there's also sort of call them indigenous catch wrestlers. And then for some reason, it seems to be an area that a ton of charlatans are also drawn to because, Matt Fury back in the day, he was a guy who claimed to have like literally that Farmer Burns, one of the ancient catch wrestlers from the early 1900s, had appeared to him in a dream to teach him techniques. And he'd be out there selling VHS tapes based off of
So he
what
had
would have talked.
the catch wrestling fanatics video of Burns, the farmer Burns,
Yeah,
from the 1800s or something.
exactly. Uh, so yeah, there's catch wrestling, and there used to be a lot more separation. You could look at a guy and go, "Oh, that guy's definitely catch or CSW," versus that guy's jujitsu. The early fights in Japan were super, like the classic matchup. I must have seen 10 fights that all went like this. You'd have some Japanese Shuto guy and some Brazilian guy who'd won, I don't know, some tournament in Brazil and now was fighting MMA. And they'd end up fighting. The Japanese guy usually had better striking. The Brazilian guy would be desperate to get into the clinch. They'd go to the ground. The Japanese guy would go for a leg lock, and you try to break the guy's leg with a heel hook. And if that worked, the match would end that way. If that didn't work, the Brazilian guy would climb on the Japanese guy's back and choke him out. That was basically, there was one decision point in the fight. Does the leg lock work? Obviously, things have evolved since then. And
Yeah.
you take a look at no-gi jiu-jitsu,
Yeah.
it's merged. Like the leg lock game is so integral to that. And actually, speaking of your leg lock deficiency disorder that you were talking about, I'll send you one of the best resources I have to get you up to speed. The central idea,
Thank you.
to simplify it, is just like if we're doing jiu-jitsu, you've got side control, you've got mount, you've got knee mount, you've got the guard, you've got the turtle. We've got these recognizable positions,
Hmm.
and something you're going to do from, if you're mounted on me, there are two or three or four or five major attack options, and they're different from if you're in side control, or they're different from
Yeah.
if you're in knee ride.
Yeah. Okay.
So leg locks are the same way. If you don't worry about the actual finish, the heel hook, the toe hold, the twisting the leg this way, the twisting the leg that way, and you start worrying about the positions, things like standard ashi, 50-50, 411. These are entanglements with the legs.
Okay.
And if you understand the entanglement game, that's the place to start. Because
Okay.
then the finish, yeah, there's nuances for sure. Like, how do I get the right grip on your heel? And is this a better grip than this? There are definitely nuances.
Hmm.
It's important to learn those. But the first thing to start with is the positional aspect of it.
Okay.
Because it also, some positions are just so much stronger and harder to escape and have more powerful submission options.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I saw, even you were talking about grips. Eric Paulson, I saw him some videos. He was like, it's really weird, and I don't remember exactly, but he would hold with a thumb in between his other
mm,
fingers. And someone explained the
yeah,
comments why, and I forgot. But I never seen that before. Normally it's like, man, like,
yeah. I
yeah,
think
I
that's a
never
Jean
saw.
LaBelle thing originally.
Interesting.
And I found, I think, one application for it where it works better for my hands.
Okay.
The idea is to create more friction between your hands.
Really?
But yeah,
Is it
it
the
doesn't
last
work.
two fingers and you go, well, now, like,
Usually the between your index finger and your middle finger, and that's where your thumb goes. If we're talking about the same grip.
I'm
Yeah, I
not
think
sure.
so.
I'm misremembering
Yeah.
maybe. I just remember that he would put the thumb in between the fingers of
Yeah.
the other hand, and I
Yeah.
never seen that before.
Yeah. Uh, I have not found that personally useful, but
Okay.
there are definitely people out there who swear by it.
Okay.
So I can only go with it's a morphological thing, or maybe I haven't yet found. Like I said, I have found one application. It was this weird guillotine choke type thing from the crucifix, where that was the natural hand position. That was actually just the other week. Like, holy shit!
Wait,
I've actually got a use for that grip.
wait. You had the guy in the crucifix,
It
and then you did a
it's
guillotine? I don't understand. I'm sorry.
not quite.
Okay.
Let's see, how did that work?
Or did you have the other arm with the legs, and then your arms are
No, but it's a front headlock situation where I turned the
okay?
guy over and then rolled
Wait,
up
I'm
as
curious.
if
So okay, wait.
as
So you
if
had
you're
him in
trying
a
to get the
guillotine, or
crucifix,
you're trying to get the guillotine,
trying to get the front headlock.
the front headlock, and then you moved him sideways.
We rolled over, so now we're belly up to the sky,
Okay.
and then I on flipped up onto my belly, but he stayed
So
on
you
his
spun him.
back.
No, did you?
I
So when
spun me.
you roll, but
Without
he didn't.
video,
You
we're
didn't
never
roll him.
gonna
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was thinking alligator where you rolled it. One time I did
no,
something
not
weird,
an
like,
alligator.
the sandbags. I was doing like with grips. I was doing like this thing when you swing this and that and
Hmm?
that, and then I went rolling, and it was no gi, and I, we were like on the floor, and the guy was kind of sideways, but I had like his neck and his armpit, and I don't know, like, I guess my buddy remembered the movement from the day before when I had done the same thing, and I'm on the floor. I'm laying on the floor, and I spun him like this. He went in the air, legs up, and landed on the other side. And he wasn't super happy. And I took advantage and everything, but I was like, oh, that was, yeah. I don't know if I thought this one through. It was just like the body remembered to do that. It was like you
It's
just
so
reminded me of
cool
that
when
when
you
you
can
talk.
pull off moves on a 12-year-old who weighs 95 pounds.
Hey, you
You
know what,
showed him who was boss.
dude? That 12-year-old came into the gym. He should have known what to expect.
Yeah.
Um, no,
He
but
signed the waiver. Well, his parents signed the waiver.
I'm legally fine. Um, Yeah, but that was funny. That was you just reminded me of that. But okay. So the CSW is not so he doesn't present because he teaches every person teaches BJJ, so of course he'll
Mhm.
give belts for that. But CSW he considers it. He's not doing this thing where like, oh, this is the no BJJ. He considers it like a catch wrestling
Yeah.
with elements of. But do you get certified in that, or he just teaches you and
Yeah.
you go like, I've studied this under him? Like, does he? Because
Yeah.
I
They're
know he doesn't
definitely
use the belt
coaching.
system for that. He doesn't use
They're
the belt.
coaching levels.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that's how he approaches it. Okay, that's interesting.
I mean, I think, I mean, yeah, I've trained in a lot of different, excuse me, a lot of different martial arts, but I'm not that fast a person, right? I have for example, 100-yard dash or even 400-meter dash. The times that I've trained to improve that, I never really got very fast at it. Not for the amount of effort I put into it.
I'm not
So
explosive either. Like me,
yeah,
it's more like the tense, like
yeah,
resisting an armbar kind of strength. I'm not so bad
yeah,
at, but I'm not explosive either.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that makes us natural grapplers, right? We're not natural strikers. Uh, and so I think that
Yeah.
I didn't know this about myself, but I always had a affinity for the grappling martial arts. I started in judo and then
Well,
the
there you go.
classical jujitsu systems. I've had the benefit of, what's interesting is exploring sambo before it was popular.
I did some of it.
And
Yeah.
uh, uh, now there are different kinds of sambo. There's sambo that looks a lot like judo, and there's sambo that looks a lot like catch wrestling with the emphasis on the legs. Which type
Well,
did you do?
the story I mentioned. Okay, so I started BJJ, and then for a while I went into a sambo gym, and so the no gi I mentioned earlier I was just doing shorthand. It was actually the guy just called it submission wrestling. He was just teaching us. But we also put a jacket. I never got any good at the judo aspect because there was too many things. Like we're learning combat sambo, we're learning wrestling, we're learning the judo. So the judo, I never got any good at it. Like I never. But I noticed that when I would go to BJJ, I was becoming a lot harder to take down even for higher belts. So that was my only kind of like silver lining of that training, I guess, for me. And the fun of putting on MMA gloves and sparring with a jacket and the gloves, that was really cool.
Mhm.
I actually really like that because for me, my whole motivation was self defense. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to get used to sparring as well with the not just when you're just grappling, but having the jacket when you're putting on the sparring gloves, the hybrid gloves. That was a lot of fun.
That's
But
something I would recommend to anybody who's interested in self-defense. Obviously, a lot of people are interested in self-defense will do MMA style sparring on the
they
ground,
should
right?
they should or
They
just do
should.
yeah, or just do MMA really.
Yeah,
If it's self defense is the main
sure.
motivator. Yeah.
But even if you're interested in, I think even if you're just doing just no gi jiu-jitsu, say,
Hmm.
a couple times a year, you should put on the gloves and just tune yourself up. This, it doesn't take very many light taps in the head to go, oh, okay, I need to adapt this game here. Like I really, really, if I'm on the bottom, need to control the head.
When I
I
do my
really need to,
shrimpings, I do one arm and I keep
yeah,
this other arm here. I don't
exactly.
put my so that's just my weird habit. And some people look at me, what the fuck is he doing? But there, I have a reason for it.
I'm ready
And
for the streets, bro.
it makes it harder because I'm out of shape. So, when you have the two hands, I know it sounds ridiculous. I think it gives you a bit more oomph when you're like shrimping out. Or maybe it's in my head. It feels more tiring to keep the one hand up. But it might just be in my head though. I don't know. Probably. Because the arm is not pushing anything. I'm not pushing the actual leg. It's not there. I guess it's just in my
It
mind.
changes the body mechanics, I suppose.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe because I don't know. Anyway, not about me
yeah,
right now.
people talk about how spider guard is just a sport jiu-jitsu thing,
It
right? Where you're
isn't
controlling the ends of the sleeves.
okay.
If you do that in MMA sparring, but with a gi top, simulating you and me getting in a fight in downtown Ottawa in October when you're wearing a coat, if I get in a fight with somebody and they're wearing a coat, of course I'm going to use the coat. I'm going to use the coat to control them. I'm going to use the
Mhm.
coat to choke them. I'm going to you wrap up their arms with the
In
coat.
Canadian,
Why wouldn't you?
look what you're wearing. Even the shirt you're wearing. is
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know how much it would withstand a lot of pulls and all that, but at least for
this is a
that
pretty
first
good.
technique,
This is a pretty good plaid shirt. You could
yeah,
the buttons would tear, but if you
yeah.
tore open the buttons,
Mm.
then I'd be wearing a light gi top,
I mean,
and you could.
some people are even experiencing like experimenting with like using t-shirt. You know, people go train with a t-shirt, they don't mind scrapping, and there's techniques now. They're t-shirt and
Yep.
hoodie based. You know, like you,
If you were to go on my YouTube channel, hypothetically,
yeah,
and look for 5 chokes you can do with a t-shirt,
nice,
you'll find 5 chokes that you can do with a t-shirt. The trick is you don't just grab the material; you have to bunch it up in different ways, whether that's coming through the neck
exactly, yeah, or
and the
the back.
shoulder to
Or-
yeah,
yeah,
exactly, or all the back, and then you create a pretty decent handle. And now I'm sure you've got an old shirt somewhere that you're going to
yeah.
throw out. So before you throw it out, take the class and put it on your sparring partner
Hmm.
and try and choke them with it, or just even screw around with it. If you know some key chokes, you can adapt a lot of them.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, okay, let's. I guess to conclude, I just want to go over your list of martial arts. You started judo. I think you mentioned you did. Mm, I don't know if it's a personal question, but what belt did you get to in judo?
Uh, not think blue belt, and
Okay, but
that's
that's the
because
belt people say you can now
yeah,
use effectively against untrained people. That's what
yeah,
most people say.
it because it's the blue belt in judo. How does it go? White belt, yellow belt,
It
green
depends on
belt, blue
country.
belt. I
Judo's
think
confusing. It depends on country.
mm,
Some of them have
the
green belt, others don't.
yeah.
Yeah.
Towards the end, my body was getting pretty gimped. Like the more throwing I did, and the more especially landing I did, the worse my back would get. I had went through a couple of years of pretty bad back problems
Okay.
that came after an incident at the fire department. I really
Okay.
hurt my back on the job,
Okay.
and then getting thrown would
Oh,
really
so
bugger my back.
judo didn't cause the injury, but because of your injury, judo was becoming untenable.
Well, judo causes injuries. Judo is beautiful, but
Yeah.
judo causes a ton of injuries.
Yeah.
And so I'd go to judo, but all I would do, I was lucky. I had a school that did a ton of newaza, and this was in the early days before there was a lot of jujitsu around.
Okay.
So essentially, I used that as my jujitsu practice area.
For the viewers,
So
Newaza is the ground game. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I should specify.
Oh no,
Yeah, judo's got tachiwaza for standing and newaza for the ground.
now I'm starting to clarify as if anything we mentioned before would be clear.
Yeah,
And for someone who doesn't know.
yeah.
And
Uh,
yeah. So okay, so blue belt in judo, and I'm just gonna try to rush through it because I'm interested in.
yeah.
Did you do Japanese jiu-jitsu? Is that what you implied earlier?
I did a little bit.
Okay.
Uh, I studied that mostly informally. It was embedded into Kajukembo, which is a
Oh, okay.
Kempo system in which I have a black belt.
Okay.
So it was embedded in there. My instructor at the time did bring in traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu people to teach us because it was one of the core systems.
Okay.
So I learned a bunch of stuff there. I'm not ranked. One of the guys that I train with now is a high level Japanese jiu-jitsu guy. So it's really fun to show him something. Goes, oh, that's just kind of like this kata that I know here, and then you see how it was preserved and how it really gets applied, and sometimes it's somewhat different.
Hmm.
So I'll
Yeah, so a video of Shintaro Higashi, I think is his name, the judo guy. He's got a
mm,
coral, the youngest coral belt in the U.S., I think, in judo. And they did a video with his father, and his father, like, did his own system of jujitsu, I think, in the 80s with some Kyokushin karate. And he was showing like this trip, and like his son was discussing. I mean, I'm sure he trained in that too, but I guess it was for the video. So the takedown was facilitated by hitting the neck,
uh,
but in judo, you would have other ways of getting there. But in that, in Japanese jiu-jitsu, it was just like you just hit the neck, and that's how you imbalance, and then you can do the takedown. So that's the way to imbalance. Whereas in judo or jiu-jitsu, like when you practice, you have to kind of like find other ways to imbalance the person. But if you add striking, it's just like,
yeah,
and then you
yeah, and then you take a look at MMA and how they're setting up takedowns with strikes and setting up strikes with takedowns.
or yeah, like
So
oh my god, what's his name? The wrestler who ended his career in Bellator, and he was part of a class action lawsuit. Jeez, wait. John Fitch? Yeah.
I think
So
so.
yeah, so he was showing how like you pretend it's gonna be a jab and then you're actually pushing with the arm and then you go ankle pick or grab a single leg. No, not ankle pick. What am I saying? Not from up there. So instead of a jab, you're actually pushing, and then you grab the leg as you're pushing that at the top here because he thought it was going to
Yeah.
be a punch, right? So
Yeah, it's gotten really sophisticated, but I remember back in the day, the height of MMA sophistication was to shoot a double leg, a fake
yeah,
double leg, and come up with an overhand right, or to throw an overhand right and then drop down, shoot a double leg.
we're for
But
Khabib, man.
uh, it still works. You still see
That
that all the
isn't
time.
isn't that what Khabib caught Conor with? Like that huge, like he I think he pretended the was it he went like this and he came back up back
Yeah.
and that hit
I
like
don't
with
have an encyclopedic fight uh,
yeah.
memory,
Yeah.
so it's I have very sporadic memories that I can draw on, and usually it's because I went back and watched something 10 times, so I
Yeah.
don't remember.
You're like Bruno.
Uh,
I don't have time to watch those MMA
I
fights.
don't.
I'm
Well,
doing the martial arts, Bruno.
yeah, I'm doing the martial arts, and then I'm doing the firefighting, and then I'm doing the outdoor stuff, and then I'm a
Yes.
parent. So my
All
my
like
I've
wussy
watched
liberal
one MMA
stuff.
event in its entirety in the last couple of years. So
I've taken a break because of all the politics involved. No
yeah,
joke. Um,
me too.
so yeah. So okay. So you've done
Uh,
Kembo, informally some Japanese jiu-jitsu. You've done judo to a
Years
level at
of
least.
traditional Chinese kung fu, so Hung Gar,
Okay.
Northern Shaolin, Southern
Okay.
White Crane, a little bit of Tai Chi.
Okay.
Uh, I'm
Do
trying.
you find ways to incorporate that still or not anymore?
Not really. Not
Okay.
really. I just don't have time.
Okay.
Uh,
No, I meant in your kind of like in your current like I guess not that. Yeah, that was
not not really. I mean, a little bit for making fun of it sometimes on my various channels. It helps to know what you're making fun of. Uh,
I was being careful. Yeah.
Also, yeah, uh, the Filipino martial arts. I'm an
Yes.
instructor under Dan Inosanto.
Oh,
So that's
nice.
also
Yeah,
Indonesian Silat, uh,
nice. They
Chunfan
have some ground
JKD.
fighting too. They have some ground fighting in Silat
Yep,
apparently.
yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. There's a move that I learned in Indonesian Silat that I learned it when I was just starting to grapple. I was like, I
Okay.
could actually use this. And I was a person who had discovered the omoplata, which is
Oh,
a move where you apply a shoulder lock with your leg, because I'd learned it in Silat and then brought it into class. And then it turns out, no, this is actually part of the jiu-jitsu curriculum.
but
But
kudos to Silat. That I mean,
yeah,
I hope it doesn't sound uh um what do you say patronizing, but the fact that it was a move from Silat that was actually used in the Jiu-Jitsu ground game, like if anything, kudos to Silat because that
yeah,
because Jiu-Jitsu is more commonly understood as efficient. So
yeah.
um,
Well, it all comes down to training methods, right? If
yeah,
it, it so long as in Silat at some point you're sparring and training against resistance, then you'll be guided to the things that actually work against resistance. And if for a couple of generations, from a teacher teaches somebody who becomes a teacher who teaches somebody, and you don't train against resistance in that period of time, then your martial art devolves into fantasy.
but I also think Filipino martial arts and Silat and those martial arts, like I think they have considerations where even the unarmed aspects don't want to give you certain habits that if you add a blade or correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my understanding is that sometimes people might like nitpick certain things, but the thing is, yeah, but that's because they wouldn't want to pick up habits where if the other person has a weapon, it
I think
changes
that's
some,
certainly true.
and
Uh,
therefore certain things you don't want to do because those martial arts start with the considerations of weaponry almost from the start or from the very start. Let me know if I'm wrong again, but I'm not very familiar. But I find those arts very interesting. I think they have like a different priority, than the ones that maybe we're more used to at this point in the West. But
it's certainly, imagine how your approach to self-defense and martial arts would change if everybody you ran into on the street had at least one knife. You just know for a fact that they've got a knife.
because that would be,
Eh, Of
yeah,
course, this could happen anywhere,
yeah, you
but
always have to keep that in mind. Yeah,
if it's a knife culture, that being said, uh, knives are pretty common in Europe, and there's a whole lot of European wrestling systems, and there's a whole lot of wrestling in Japanese jiu-jitsu
yeah.
because, I mean, a lot of the armor, say in the Middle Ages, was so good. These movies where I come up with my sword and I cut through your breastplate and you go, ah,
No, you had
you
to
fall
poke
back.
in, you had to hold, you had to
Exactly.
get in. The
A
dagger
lot
was
of
like very long and pointy for that. I went into
exactly.
recently went into a deep hole where I really want to go try some HEMA for the medieval wrestling and dagger, but you have to kind of do the German longsword for the place I'm looking at. You have to do a German longsword first, and then when you reach those those like that initial understanding, it's about 3 months, I think. Then they let you like kind of choose your focus, and I was like, that could be interesting, like kind of from a self defense standpoint too. I know it's not like no one carries like a long pointy dagger; it's more short blade. I get
Yeah.
that, but just still to understand the logistics and there's sort of like just like that medieval wrestling and mix a bit with the dagger there. That could be interesting. So I don't know. I might look into that.
I think it would depend. HEMA, historical European martial arts, would
See,
depend
see,
so
earlier I was saying
much.
there was a ground game. Yeah, you're like Bruno. What's HEMA?
Yeah,
Tell the
would
viewers.
would de- would depend so much on the school because you could certainly see a whole bunch of people getting together and just turning it into a giant wank fest of like you would do this and then I would do that and let us
Oh, for sure,
practice
for
these
sure.
moves in slow motion versus let's go try this.
But there's a guy, Josh, BJJ guy on YouTube, who also did some judo, and he actually went to like a HEMA school where they had like I mean not like deep dive grappling like CSW or something,
Yeah.
but like the medieval wrestling for the needs of that of what they did. And he kind of wrestled with a guy, and the guy like knew what he was doing. Again, like he didn't turn it into a BJJ match, to be clear, but no, there's good places and there's bad places for sure. Like I agree. Like if, but the place I was looking at, like supposedly wrestle as well within the context of their training, so that's what made me go see that. To me is interesting. Um, because if
I
you,
would love to do it.
yeah,
I don't have the time right now, but it'd be
yeah,
a ton of fun to
me
go
neither. To be
play.
honest, I'm looking at it. I'm like, I don't know when the heck I'm like. I barely train as it is anyway. But man, we an hour and a half. Okay, we have to stop at this point. I'm running out of time. See, we're talking about time. Um, it's kind of surprising. We cover like a very large scope of topics, but at the same time, I feel like most of them. I wish we had been able to deep dive more into it, but um,
Well, if you get good feedback from this and the number of people enjoying it compared to the number of people who send you hate mail because of it is positive, we can do it again sometime.
see, this is the good thing. I'm not big enough to get hate mail yet. I just have like the
Oh, well,
supporters
just
like,
wait.
"Hey, Bruno, good job!" Like a
Just wait.
few good friends, and they're like, "Yeah, that was
Well,
cool."
if we didn't achieve hate mail status today, then we're not doing our job.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't tickle the algorithm the right way. Anyway, uh, listen, Stefan, thank you very much for your time. You're truly a fascinating person. It's really fun to talk to you. And
Well, Bruno, thank you so much, and to the listeners as well. Thank you for if you've stuck around this long. I feel sorry for you, but I'd also like to thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah, you see, like now I'm thinking back on it, and I wish I had asked you more questions over fire fighting, but them's the cards. So everyone, thank you very much for watching. Stefan, thank you so much for your time, and yeah, if like see, I'm remembering now. Where can people find you online? And then we'll be done.
Well, I suppose from a martial arts point of view, I'm mostly at grapplearts.com.
Okay.
Although if you search my name on YouTube, you can find my YouTube channel very easily.
Okay.
And then the new book, which my publisher would be mad at me if I didn't pimp, is available everywhere. It's available at Indigo. It's available Barnes and Noble, Amazon. I was just talking to a small independent bookstore around the corner. They're going to be getting a bunch of copies in, and then another independent bookstore around the other corner has already got it in. So it's pretty much everywhere.
Cool. Okay, I'll put the links, like the book, the website, and then the YouTube channel. But I'm gonna go do a deep dive on your YouTube channel because you mentioned a few things. I'm gonna go have a look now. Okay,
Wonderful. Take care.
thank you very much.